welcome. My name is Cassidy Diamond. I am the the manager of public programs and events here at the International Documentary Association. Thank you for joining us for this amazing conversation around Finding Ying Ying with moderated by journalist Rebecca Sun. We're super excited for it. Before we begin, I'd like to start with a brief land acknowledgement. Today, I am coming to you from Chicago, which is on the land of the Three Fires people, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. I would also like to thank our sponsor, IndieWire, for offering us support for this screening series, along with support from KCRW. We have many screenings coming up all the way through the end of January, which we're really excited for. We're going to take a little break in December, excuse me, but you can check out our website, documentary.org/screening series, to find out more about these upcoming conversations and films. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Rebecca, and we can get this amazing conversation started. Welcome, Rebecca. Oh, you have to unmute.
Okay.
No worries. It's like we all forget to use Zoom, how to use Zoom in a moment. So
it's only been 8 months of this pandemic.
Right, exactly. Well, welcome.
Thanks so much, Cassidy. Thanks for having me. I have the great pleasure of moderating this conversation with the filmmakers behind Finding Ying Ying. So I'll first start by introducing the director, producer, and cinematographer, Jenny Shi. Jenny is from China and was a journalism student at Northwestern University when she began making Finding Ying Ying. This is her first feature documentary, and we're really happy to have you here. I will say here that I'm giving short bios because I want to provide more time for discussion. And so anybody who wants to find out more about our three panelists, please go online where you can read more extensive bios. Next, I'll introduce Diane Kwan, who is no stranger to producing and filmmaking. I would say that just to give one notable title, she produced the Oscar and Emmy nominated Minding the Gap from Bing Liu just a couple of years ago. If you haven't seen that, I think it's still on Hulu. Finally, I want to introduce producer Brent Huffman, who actually was Jenny's documentary professor at Northwestern when she started making this film, and came on board as a producer. And I think in many ways what I've read is that your documentary course inspired Jenny to take her career in this direction. So we're really happy to have you here, Brent. Okay, everybody unmute. We're gonna start. We're gonna start this discussion. So I think one of the things that really immediately struck me and was remarkable about the documentary is that we were not watching footage of people reminiscing about the search. We were actually watching, events unfold in real time, going back as far as 2017 when Ying Ying first disappeared. Jenny, you talk about how, you joined the search as a volunteer, and because you were a film student, I presume taking this documentary class at the same time, began to capture footage. At the time, I'm curious about what you might thought you would do with this, not just in terms of making a film, but what type of film?
Yeah, so for me, when I first heard about Ying's disappearance, I was actually in Brent class. I was taking a documentary journalism class. So at that time, when I first heard about Ying's disappearance, it was actually through our college alumni group chat. So I later found out Ying and we actually went to the same university in China. But I didn't think about even like filming stuff. I was basically like other Chinese students. We were spreading the words, posting her information on our social media. And I also learned that there were a lot of volunteers at Urbana-Champaign area, especially after Ying's parents arrived in the US. There are volunteers who delivered food for the family and also helped them with translation, things like that. And I, as like a student from a journalism school, of course, I wanted to figure out what happened and what's going on. And also I had a lot of friends actually who are my college friends. They were studying at U of I. So I just went down and also tried to see what I could do to help the family. And many people, like there are many journalists, they're covering the story and also filming the public events like press conference, things like that. And I got to meet the family as a volunteer and spend time with them. And I really see, I really saw that they are really anxious and they're really trying to figure out what happened to Ying Ying. And for me, I started to think about what else I could do. And I had a camera and I knew how to tell a story. And I started to think about maybe I can start to capture the places Ying used to study and used to work. So during the time I spent with the family, sometimes they would like videotape Ying's office, like with their phone. So I also pitched the idea to them, and they feel like, that was something they would love to do because they could bring back the footage to China to share with their relatives, family members. Especially Ying was actually the first person in the whole family who went to college and eventually came to the US to study. So for them, that would be something helpful. But to be honest, I didn't really think about how far I would go, like when I would like stop filming or whatever. Everything, I think it's just like the story, it was unfolding at that time. And I just made the decision as basically the more time I spend with the family, I would see, what I'm gonna do with the footage.
That makes sense. That's interesting. You're right. I mean, I think that if for nothing else, it would have been an amazing sort of private home video for the family to imagine what her life in the US was like. Brent, did you know that Jenny was working on this? I mean, obviously this was a developing story in the Urbana-Champaign area, and I think it probably made Illinois news. I mean, it made nationwide news. But at what point did you kind of, get involved either as faculty, as a professor, kind of guiding her through it, before, or as it escalated into, potentially becoming a documentary?
Yeah, so Jenny following the story, it was really a roller coaster where things were sort of changing all the time. Initially, I think, we thought that, Ying Ying had just disappeared, for a while, maybe was having family trouble. And we were really hopeful that she was alive and should be found. Jenny kind of started this as her sort of thesis documentary. So there's a short version that she made in my class, and I'm a professor and a filmmaker too, and my focus is China. So this was enormously interesting on many levels. And Jenny was just an incredible student. She's so talented and so ambitious. I think this is such a big, ambitious, complex project to take on as a student. But like I said, she did an incredible job, and I wanted to come on to help craft the story, help have the story reach a wider audience.
One very obvious distinguishing factor of this film is that this is not, I like that a lot of the reviews have explained that this is not your typical quote unquote true crime, documentary. And there's a lot of cultural nuance in it. And I think there's a lot that, could not be accomplished or captured without a filmmaker who shares a background that is in some ways so similar or parallel to Ying Ying and her family's. I'm curious, as somebody who is Chinese, how you got her family on board. Like you Jenny, you talked a little bit about, proposing the idea, and they had been filming things, but, in general, how did you navigate that? Because there's so many issues, particularly in terms of, it's mentioned when the family is back in China and talking about kind of mianzi, we're talking about face, we're talking about the fact that we usually hide any sort of pain and public struggles that we're going to. And now Ying Ying's family is going through the most public pain imaginable. How did you work through those issues?
Yeah, so at first, I didn't really, start filming the family as if they're the main character of the film. But I think it was like maybe a month or two into production, into filming, we pitched the idea to the family that we are going to document their journey. And I would say, like, at first, the families, their priority was definitely, trying to find Ying Ying. So they didn't want to be distracted to, anything else. And even though there were, some media, some reporters approached them, they would do like quick, short interviews, and that's it. So that won't really, create extra burden, especially emotional burden on them. But I think later on, basically, we were still visiting the family. I visit them like almost once a week, and sometimes would stay like 2 or 3 days each time I visit them. And also we went out to search with other volunteer searchers. So we were documenting the process of the search in case we miss anything when we were searching. So we can, afterwards we could watch the footage we captured. And then we, sort of like explain our intention, because we feel like right now, the incidents just happened and there were a lot of media attention and also public attention. But that's, that's normal. But as the time pass away, and also, there will be like, we will get to certain point that like there's no public attention and media attention at some point. But the case is still, under investigation. And the family, they had the fear that the public attention and media attention would eventually fade away as everyone's life goes on. And that's not something they are hoping for. And they really want people can help them to find Ying Ying. So eventually they feel like it's probably okay just to start documenting their journey, even though they didn't know what's going to happen in future, but they are actually on board with us. But again, even though they were on board with us, we were very careful about like how we are going to film them. So there were certain moments we need to make ethical decisions. For example, like whenever like the mom is crying or the family, they were in deep grief, whether are we going to like keep filming those worst moments in their life? And sometimes it's also about communication. And like you mentioned, there are a lot of cultural nuance. As a Chinese, native Chinese, I understand like save face, like mian, things like that. But other people from different country and another country and another cultural background probably can't understand. And I would say like in terms of the whole process of the filmmaking, in the film, like in the second part of the film, we actually showed a lot about the family conflict and the family relationships. That's actually, a way we wanted to show that how important Ying Ying was to the family and how much her life has touched on everyone else. So like for the film, before we show it to any public audience, any public screenings, we show it to the family first, because we wanted to make sure they were okay with what we captured and what we are going to show to the audience. I was a little bit nervous before show the cut to them, because I thought maybe they would feel uncomfortable about the family conflicts we show in the film. But actually they were okay with that, because they told me that, that was what exactly happened. That's the fact. And that's what they wanted to show to the audience, that, how much their life has been changed after all this happened.
I was just going to bring up when Jenny keeps bringing up we would do this or we do that. Shilin's son, who isn't on the call with us, he was our DP and another DP with Jenny and our co-producer, and he was a student at U of I, as well as an international student, Chinese international student as well. So the two Jenny and Shilin were there always to help with the family, and because he also was an international student, I think that helped a lot in building trust. And I also want to give credit to Jenny and Shilin. They were very sensitive. And I think that's what was a big plus for me when I was I first met Jenny, was just being so aware that she was very ethical minded and very thoughtful about when is it stepping over the line and am I doing the right thing? She was always asking that question from the beginning, and it.
I'd also say really, really quick that when the story first came out, journalists that were covering it in a really sensational, unethical way, where Ying Ying was basically treated like a victim stereotype. If she was, and some stories wouldn't name her at all. The stories would usually focus on the killer and the, you know, sensational, horrific sort of details. So I think Jenny and Shilin did a great job of not going down that really sort of terrible, dangerous road, and being ethical and really caring about the family.
I would love for all three of you guys, and maybe we'll start with Brent, because you mentioned a few minutes ago about crafting the storytelling and working with Jenny on that. You know, again, there is a typical format for a lot of these types of stories. They focus a lot on the crime. They focus a lot on the perpetrator. You know, as you guys were putting this film together, what were the themes that you were talking about that emerged, and what was the storyline or the narrative that you wanted for this documentary?
So yeah, I could just start with the focus being on Ying Ying and her family, not on the crime. I think we, just so the film wouldn't be confusing, we have to tell crime details, but you know, we really didn't want this to be the, you know, the salacious true crime kind of story. Like I said, that focuses on the killer and you know, the horrific details, but one that really celebrates Ying Ying, celebrates her just incredible, loving family. I wish I had a family like Ying Ying's, you know, this incredible family that would do anything to find her and break those victim stereotypes, break the kind of negative Asian American stereotypes that our own government is spreading. And yeah, and like I said, tell this story that just showed how wonderful she was, how wonderful her family was.
I think that I think that's what attracted me to the story was the idea. We were all on board that Ying Ying would be, you know, even the title "Finding Ying Ying" wasn't literally necessarily finding the body, but also finding Ying Ying as a person. And so then the idea was, how do we bring her to life? And one of the things that was so important was Jenny being able to get her boyfriend to share her diaries with Jenny, because it was a beautiful way where we could make her feel real and understand her in a real way. And I think the second theme for me as a Chinese, American-born Chinese, was the to try to humanize the international student. I have to admit that I even had stereotypes of international students in general and Chinese students. And when Jenny would share with me how she, when she was going through diaries and learning about Ying Ying, how she shared so many of the same feelings as Ying Ying, and then she gave me background about international students. I thought that was such an important story to tell too, to break the stereotypes, especially, you know, who knew that the story would come out, you know, in these last 2 years with what's happening in political situations. So I thought that was important for us to share.
What about you, Jenny, in terms of your closeness and your intimate knowledge of what the experience of international students and what the families are like? Everybody thinks, I think we do also as an ABC, there's a lot of, you're kind of just told like, oh, it's like super rich Chinese people who are sending their kids, you know, to the US. And you can see that Ying Ying's family is clearly not that. What were you trying to bring out in telling this story?
So for me, like one of the reasons why I was drawn into the story, definitely because of who I was. I was an international student. And when it first happened, like my parents, they were so worried about me. Even though like I had nothing to do with what was going on in Champaign, they would text me like every day, checking in whether I was safe and ask me, don't go outside, stay at home, or don't go down to Urbana-Champaign. They knew I was a journalism student. That's something I would probably do, but they just kept reminding me. And I just thought about, you know, what if this was something happened to me, what my parents would look like. That really, basically, I couldn't even like think about that, but I just can't stop thinking about that. And that's why I decided to follow and went down. And also, basically staying with Ying's parents, I heard so much about how amazing she was and how caring, how brilliant she was, hearing about all her stories from different people, not just from her family, also from her colleagues, even though they just knew Ying Ying like for several weeks, but they all liked Ying Ying. And also for me, the first 5 months, I was basically experiencing the family's grief, and also I myself, as one of the Chinese international students at that time, like how we are feeling about Ying's disappearance, and we actually really share like similar experiences, especially when I found out her diary, like Diane just mentioned, the diary she kept before she went missing in the U.S. She very detailedly, I mean, she talked about her experience being an international student, how lonely she was. And sometimes she was very afraid, but she would just, keep going. And I actually kept diary when I first came here. And these are the exact words I would put in my own diaries. And just that also reminded me like my experience getting to someone's car. I feel like maybe many people like they couldn't understand why we got into a stranger's car right here. We just don't know each other, but why we get into someone's car. But if you take the cultural elements into consideration and think about we're foreigners like in a brand new country, and we have that perception of like what the country looks like in our own home country, but living in a foreign country, that's totally different from what you learn from textbook or movies. So that could happen. And I definitely think, our life and our knowledge, and also a lot of parts can be prepared as an international student coming to a foreign country to study, like universities in the US, maybe they can provide better service programs like orientation, things like that. Even though I didn't know what exactly happened between the conversation Ying had and between Ying Ying and the perpetrator, but from my perspective, I feel like her being an international student, not familiar with the country and the culture here, definitely is part of the reason she got into that car, and that was just very sad for me. So I just feel like the international student perspective is very important for me to show in the film, and to connect the audience with my experience and also Ying's experience.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I felt like you had such a judicious balance of just knowing how to insert enough of yourself to provide context for Ying Ying's story, but truly did keep the focus not just on her family, but on Ying Ying herself. And I'd like to talk about that choice, of that structural choice of framing the movie, anchoring it with her own voice. You can see from the diary that she mostly wrote in Chinese. Can you guys talk to me about the decision to have you, Jenny, do the narration, and then secondly to translate it in English? Again, every choice is conscious, and why did you guys pick that choice? We'll start with Jenny.
Yes. So at first, I actually read the diary in Mandarin. So whenever, it depends on like the diary. Sometimes Ying would write in English, so I would read in English. But for the Mandarin part, I would just read in Mandarin. And I wasn't in the film at all at the very beginning, and that wasn't my intentional plan. But when we think about how we are going to connect the film with the audience, we thought about like who are going to be the audience of this film. And for me, the purpose of making this film is really to get more people to know who Ying Ying was, and to memorize her as such an amazing person. And I feel like I really want to, make some change in the US. So I feel like the English speaking audience should be the audience of this film. And that's when we started to think about maybe we should, do all the voiceover in English, because we want to show Ying's handwriting and we want to animate it on the screen. But if we have like subtitles, the audience had to read the subtitles, and there will be too much going on the diary, and we on the screen, and we don't want them to miss those beautiful handwritings. So that's a decision why I narrate the film in English. And in terms of like myself, it actually came from an ethical question. So when I had a like 30 minutes short student version, we had a work in progress screening in Chicago. And that was mostly about the family, their experience in the first 2 months in the US. And in the Q&A session, one of the audience actually asked me why I made this film and whether like we are sort of exploiting the family, because we are basically showing like, you know, the deep grief. And that was like the time I started to think about maybe I should explain, you know, somehow explain why I'm making this film. And also it's very important to let the audience know who's behind this film. That will be very different if it's an audience, I mean, someone, maybe a white reporter who's telling a Chinese story versus a Chinese native Chinese and also an international student telling the story. That would be very different. So for us, somehow, maybe it can explain, you know, why we want to tell the story. And also, there were a lot of information and emotions, and also my perspective cannot be explained without my existence in the film. And also, we had different work in progress screenings. I think every time we had a screening, there will be more audience suggest like I should be in the film. So I actually add myself little by little, and then eventually, right now I'm in the film, like sort of like throughout the whole film, but not taking a major role as a character.
I would say that Jenny did not want to be in the film. That was not like her goal to be in her documentary. But as she said, the more we had work in progress screenings, we could see that the question kept coming up. Why are you telling, why are you telling the story? And the more you get to know Jenny, you understand why it makes sense, and why she should be the one to tell the story. In terms of her voice being the diary narrating, the event, actually in the beginning, her voice was just supposed to be the temp voice, just to read the diaries until we found a real person, like an actress or someone else, so that we could distinguish the two voices from when Jenny's in the film and when it's supposed to be Ying in the diary. But the more and more we tried different people, the more and more it came to us that we're like, it feels best when Jenny reads it. It felt the most authentic and real. And so the thing, what we just tried to do was to make it clear when Jenny's voice is coming on to read for the Ying versus when she's being herself as Jenny. So our editor, John Farbrother, was great in working with us to help us distinguish the two.
Yeah, and I'd say I'd also plug John. I think John did just an incredible job here with the film. I'm a big fan of pure like cinema verite, as Jenny could probably contest to. So initially it was a very verite film, but I think Jenny is totally right. We had this reaction like who's making this film and why, and why that question is maybe not always important in verite. I think it was important here that the audience knows someone that truly cares about Ying and that really understands the culture and the situation, understands the family, deeply cares about the family, that person is telling the story. And then I think Jenny's read of the diary, while it wasn't the first choice, I think just everyone sort of loved it when they heard it. I'm a big fan of the documentary The Times of Harvey Milk, which I think brings Harvey Milk back to life, and I think Jenny's voice does in some ways bring Ying back to life, and we can sort of get to know her and sort of fall in love with her in the film.
Yeah, I think I really can't imagine. I think with an actress or sort of a professional voice performer, yeah, I think it would have been a very different experience. And I love that, all three of you guys are engaging so head on with these, these questions of ethics. And I think it'll be very instructive for people who want to tackle, stories about this type of difficult subject matter. I think that the effect, again, of the narration, and Jenny's presence. I mean, there's this moment, I think it was when you were in Nanping, where Yingying's mom tells you that you really remind her of Yingying, and it's kind but like deeply sad to hear that. And I'm curious again, like about, I think this is instructive to people, how do you, Jenny, as a how do you wear the two hats of being, the filmmaker, but also this person who's reacting to an incident that sort of so closely reflects somebody, who you are? How do you separate those things? How did you navigate through those issues of sometimes being a stand-in or a proxy? Because I did start to do that in my mind, and you sort of represented a what if for me when I watched it. What if Yingying had never gotten into that car? She'd be starting her career now like you, and these thoughts. How did you negotiate that?
Yeah, it was really challenging for me. And I don't think I ever really separate myself, as the family friend or volunteer, or, just on the other hand, as a filmmaker. I was trying to like find a balance in between. And most of the time, I would say in the first 5 months, when the family was still in the US, I visited them. Also, Shilin, other cinematographer, when we visited the family, we were without camera. We were not filming most of the time, but whenever we wanted to film, we would ask them whether it's okay to film right now, maybe 10 minutes of silent moment, just them sitting in the living room, things like that. So we would ask them. And there were a lot of moments I just feel like, for example, there was a press conference in the film. Actually, Ying's mom totally broke down and she was crying. Like for me, I couldn't film things like that, but it was Shilin. He could hold the camera and film those devastating moments. So for us, I think Shilin and we had a great like combination in terms of like filming. So I was really like, I just feel like I'm a very emotional person. So sometimes Shilin could help me in situation that I cannot hold the camera. And then I think in China, that was the time I lived with the family. I actually live in their house, and Ying's parents, they really treated me like their own daughter. They would ask me whether I wanted to get some bubble tea or bread, things like that. Treated me, really, really nice. And Ying's mom, she was actually very happy to see me. And I think at night after dinner, she would come to the bedroom where I stayed at that time. Like she would chatted with me and really happy and show me like the new pajama like she bought, things like that. So most of the time, I think me being there was some sort of comfort, but I had mixed feelings because, on the one hand, yes, I did somehow made the mom happy, but on the other hand, that was also like a reminder, basically reminding her, this is not your daughter. Your daughter is gone, and this is just someone else being here. And I could tell like the time when I had to leave, Ying's mom was really sad, and I just couldn't imagine like after I left, just thinking about the empty room in their house. So it was just very difficult to me. And sometimes Ying's mom, she would still text me through WeChat, showing me like the new coat she bought with her friends, things like that. And we still try to keep in touch in this way. And somehow, I don't know, I feel like what I learned at school is really, you need to be a fly on the wall, and you really need to separate your role as a filmmaker who's documenting everything versus like a friend who got really close to, the subject. But I think in Finding Yingying, the boundary is really blurred. And actually, I just feel like, on the one hand, like the film, right now we made a film and it can bring Ying's story and her family story all over the world. That was great. But on the other hand, get to know them, and thinking about, what else I can do for them other than being a filmmaker. So yeah, so we are still in touch with the family, and also basically keep them updated about the film. They're also hoping that the film can be shown in China. And we want to make sure, because this is such a high profile case, and whenever it's shown in China, we would let the family know to see what kind of concern they have in terms of like marketing or anything else. We want to make sure, try to avoid any consequence because of like the release of the film.
That's great. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Chinese distribution plan. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because, again, I think the footage that you used, you could see that this was widely covered. This was widely covered across the country in China, and sort of had, again, the context you provided had the implications of becoming an international incident, with all of the money that Chinese families pour into the American university systems is certainly an important note. Let me move into some of the other aspects of the filmmaking process, and just to talk about, there were a lot of, you earned a lot of fellowships and grants and different programs to help you complete the film. I guess I want to ask Diane, you were in last year's Sundance producing fellowship with this. Tell me a little bit about, how that experience, or any of the other experiences you guys had with this, helped to shape the final product. What effect did it have?
Well, it definitely, when I look at a story, or when we look at a story, we always think about, like, as Jenny said, who is our audience? And I think being part of the fellowships and the lab, we actually showed it at Sundance, work in progress screening, the film. It really helped us see, like, what should the story be, and who is our audience, and because of that, how we need to shape the story. So, like Jenny was saying, or your question about why did we have it in English versus Chinese, I think all these fellowships help us make those decisions about the best way to get this film out there, because we really wanted it to be as broad as possible. We don't want it to be just thought of as a true crime film, definitely not. So that came into effect, that idea when we had work in progress screens. We had much more crime in it, not because we like it, but we thought we needed to tell it. But as time went on, we saw that we don't need to have all that in it. So we dialed that back a lot. So I think each of these work in progress screens and these fellowships really helped us narrow in to what elements have to stay in and what resonates most to get the broadest audience. And I think we, between John and Jenny and Shalyn, really did a great job of narrowing that. And personally, I am not a fan of true crime. So I was so happy that we could make a film that's as strong and powerful without having to keep those elements.
There's an issue a lot with narrative filmmaking, where we talk a lot when we talk about, like, Asian American, cinema that's happening now, how much of the balance is in Chinese versus English. Lulu Wang has talked about, having conversations with potential financiers about The Farewell. Although Ying Ying's narration, the narration of Ying Ying's diary is in English, there are huge swaths of the film in Chinese, so much so that, at some point during the film, when you cut to an FBI agent or a US attorney or a prosecutor, I was like, oh, right, I'm watching a movie in English, I forgot. I'm curious about, in the documentary world, did you run into any challenges with potential American partners, with the fact that this is a film where a huge swath of the storytelling is in Chinese?
I would have to say there were some distributors that passed because of that, because of the concern that there was too much Chinese language. And I think it was between all of us, we had to decide what's more important, to try to win over this distributor or to tell the story that we think it needs to be out there and to say it in the way that we want it. You're right. It is hard for certain partners to want to distribute a film that has lots of subtitles or the Chinese language, or not enough true crime. You know, there's definitely some partners who wanted more of the true crime. So we just had to keep going back to how do we make it as broad as possible, but stay true to the story we want to tell.
I see that I have enough time to ask a question. I skipped over before. This is what, you know, when we were talking about just, again, ethical decisions and integrating into your subjects. I was very struck by that scene that you captured of Ying Ying's parents fighting, and like fighting in a very, very raw and physical way. And again, I think drawing on my own Chinese family and parents, it was sort of stunning to see. How did you and Shilling actually capture that? Like, just talk about just physically, like, how did you guys pick up your cameras and get that footage, and what was it like?
Yeah, so we were actually filming the breakfast, and we didn't expect what's going to happen next. But I think they just have some conversations and started to yell at each other. And for us, I think we didn't really have time to react, like to make a decision that we're gonna like stop filming. I think we kind of like film a little bit of the beginning, but if you still recall like that scene in the film, we cut away to some close-ups of like the broken balls, things like that, because I was in the shot. I tried to stop the fight. But again, I don't want to be like too much in the film, so we basically just cut away. So for me, I feel like I still need to like navigate how much like the filmmaker need to be kind of like in the story itself, whether we should interfere, you know, what's going on. But at that moment, I feel like, you know, if we don't stop them, maybe it will become something really harmful. So I decided to stop them. So that's the, you know, behind the scenes story of that scene. But the reason, you know, why we wanted to include it in the film is just really to see, you know, how important Ying was to all of them, and really to show the audience, you know, what is behind a heinous crime or a tragedy like this, family conflicts and all things like that. So that's why we put it in the film. And then the family, I think that's the worst. That's the scene that I worried about the most. But the family, they seemed okay, and they feel like that's what happened, just the reality.
Yeah, I would say the same. I was really nervous about it because I agree with you, Rebecca. Knowing my family, it would be like, it's so hard to, it's always about saving face, and so hard to show these inner family feelings. And so I was nervous when Jenny was saying that she's about to show it to family, but they were so supportive of Jenny in the story.
Yeah, I just would say I feel such empathy when I see that scene, and it isn't like we just see one note of emotion from the family. Like we really see the full range of sadness and grief and anger. And I just think that I feel that makes the family so much more relatable. And like Jenny said, it really shows that the loss of Ying Ying is never over. Like this, it's not something that is ever going to heal really, and it's always a part of their life. And I feel like that moment really shows that.
Yeah, I think that was what, I mean, yeah, for sure. That scene was what I picked up on, where like, if I was in your shoes, that is the scene I would be terrified that they would be like, you got to cut this, because it stood out so much. But I think in general, the whole Nanping segment to me was something you never see when you read these news articles. And, you know, I definitely read about, you know, Ying Ying's disappearance in 2017. And I followed that news story, I think just in general as a Chinese American, you know, so there's one degree of remove there, but I followed that story. But what the film shows you is what these headlines never get at, which is the aftermath, you know, of these families and what their neighbors say about them, and what it does, you know, to the parents. And I think that was all very revelatory. I guess to wrap up, I would just like to ask you guys something that we've already touched on in this conversation, but you know, as this film gets seen by more and more people, particularly people who come from very different cultural backgrounds and contexts, and sort of places of understanding, what are some of the takeaways that you would like them to have from watching Finding Ying?
Yeah, so for me, this takeaway never changed, which is, you know, after they watch the film, I hope the audience can really have an image of a talented young woman who had a bright future ahead, and how much her life has touched others. And you know, the film is Finding Ying Ying, really finding who she was. Yeah.
I think for me, I always wanted to humanize the idea of the victim in all these crime stories, that these are real people and they're the ones usually forgotten. So I want to remind people that these are important people that we have to pay attention to in these stories, but also to humanize, like we were talking about, the international student, to put a face to all these stories we hear about international students. These are real people too, and they're Dunny, you know, they're Ying Ying, they're Shalin.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that we talked about the film not being true crime, but also the film not being this just sad and hopeless story, that the film, and these are kind of big shoes to fill, but that the film can in some way, be Ying Ying's legacy, that she sort of lives on through the film, and new audiences can be introduced to her and find out how incredible she was, find out how incredible her family was through the film. I hope that's what the film can represent.
Yeah, and I think particularly at a time when Chinese internationals specifically are being so flattened in their portrayal, sometimes in what we see in American media, I think particularly if you're talking about a Chinese international student who came here to study science, there's just a very one-dimensional picture there, and the ideas of the kinds of parents that send them there, and this really it peels that away. It peels that away, and so I think that this film has accomplished that. I'm thankful to you guys for really recording Ying Ying's story and her legacy in such a beautiful way, and I hope it's something that her family can watch and receive some small measure of comfort that their daughter really meant a lot, or means a lot to people. Thank you guys so much for your comments and for your time, and for this robust discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, IDA.